In this episode, we talked to David Aronica, the head of growth marketing at YellowBrick Data, a Series C tech company backed by some really big investors. We talk about some really tactical things, like how they figure out the right messaging for each persona that they're selling into, how they're actually using their tech stack across ZoomInfo, Apollo, Outreach, and some other tools. And we get into the best money they spent on their marketing team so far this year. The last thing before we get into the episode, if you get just a little bit of value from this, the best way that you can pay it forward and help us build this thing from the ground up is to share it with a friend that you think might enjoy it, or just liking the video on YouTube, subscribing to the channel, or subscribing to us on Spotify or Apple or anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. We're trying to bring you the most candid stories and tactics from some of the world's best marketing leaders. And the only way that we can keep doing that is with your support. All right, let's get into the episode. Today, we are joined by David Aronica, a dear friend of mine that is also the head of growth marketing at YellowBrick Data, a Series C company that is backed by the likes of Google Ventures, DFJ, Menlo Ventures. Prior to that, he was the VP of growth at Pliancy, enterprise IT services company. Before that, he was the director of BD at Splash, which is backed by LHV and Spark, along some other startup roles as well. David, how's it going?
Good to be here. Good to see you.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into things today. I think you have a particularly unique background because you carried a bag as a sales rep, you've been a BDR, you've managed BDR teams, and now you manage a marketing team. So I think that's a really good place to start. I mean, in terms of your unique background, how do you think that gives you an edge as a marketing leader?
Yeah, I think marketing was always something I was interested in, even when I was starting out as an SDR. I don't know if back whenever that was, I thought that I would eventually move into marketing, but I always found myself working or wanting to spend time with the marketing teams that I was working with, even back when I was at a company called Parsley that was an audience analytics platform built for publishers, like content producers. And because of that, I think even as an SDR and then in managing SDRs, I was always thinking about how we could incorporate the work that the marketing team was doing. It was almost the reverse from what I'm doing now. And now that I've kind of made this transition into being on this side of the go-to-market function, I try to think about the usability of everything that we produce from a marketing perspective. I think that's something that a lot of times gets overlooked, or is something that's left to a sales enablement function if your company is fortunate enough to have that. And I think having been an SDR, having managed SDRs, taking that extra care to make sure that any content that we're producing has the clarity of communication, that people know what to do with it and how to use it. I think that has been one of the key advantages of having that background.
Let's talk about that a little bit more. So is there kind of an example or story of something you guys have maybe produced recently on the marketing side that you really went through and thought, hey, how is the sales team actually going to use this, and kind of what those results were?
Yeah, for sure. I think, we all seen these persona slides, right? Or maybe it's a document and it's this is what motivates these people, this is what their pain points they may be feeling and so forth. We're trying to basically make our best guess, right? And understand who our buyers may be or who the users of our products may be. And when you hand that over, and it's this huge slide of just a lot of text, and maybe you put a picture there to try to make it a little bit more humanized, right? When ultimately it's just too much to consume. And so I think we've started to take things like that and boil it down. It's just, these are the key things that actually, the key messages that matters to these people. So if you get them on the phone, instead of looking at this thing or looking at the slide, you know exactly that if I can work this into a conversation, I might have a better chance of actually connecting this to some kind of business value or pain point that person might be feeling. So I guess just trying to make everything that we create more concise, and just don't take chances with will the team know how to use this, but be very prescriptive basically. And this is how we think you should use it. And then to kind of do that always taking feedback from them too, to understand what could we do better? Is this useful, and so forth.
So, right, your credibility as a sales leader in the past helps you think through this stuff for your sales team in particular, but also it sounds like you're reaching across the aisle probably more than most marketing leaders to get the feedback from the sales team and trying to like put yourself in their shoes.
I mean, that may be true. I think most market leaders today, I think you doing that. I mean, and I think that it's always been, or it seems second nature to me. I mean, I think like there's a lot of people that have said this way before me, but it's like the entire idea of marketing is to make sales easier. Right? And so if that's really the case, then they are customers in a lot of way. And if what we're producing is not useful for them or is not moving the needle for them, well, we're just not making our customers happy. So I think that is my opinion today is in making sure what we're doing is useful. But yeah, I mean, I also have today I work very closely with someone who I've worked with in the past, who was our VP of sales at Splash, named Mark Fields, who's now the SVP of sales at YellowBrick. So having that relationship built in is a huge advantage, right? Like him and I have worked together now for almost 4.5 years, probably total in our career, maybe even slightly more. And so because of that, we can have really honest conversations. We're including each other in conversations that maybe you don't usually have a marketer in or a sales leader in. And I think that's been really useful for both of us.
Yeah, I think having that relationship right with the sales leadership is super important, particularly on the marketing side. So are you getting, let's back up for a second. In your role right now, who are you overseeing? Who's on your team?
Yeah, so right now the team is, we have a team of SDRs, and they report to a director of our SDR team. And then there's 2 product marketers. There is, and then I also manage someone through remote growth partners, as you know, and an agency as well. So we're kind of pieced together a combination of full-time employees, and that includes SDRs and product marketers, and contractors, and agency.
So we've answered the age-old question: who should SDRs report to? They should report to a marketing leader that has sales experience.
Yeah, exactly. I think like that's the agile answer to that question is like that. I think that was a convenience that we had, right? I don't think there's like a perfect fit in any organization. I think it simply comes down to like who knows how to manage those kind of teams, whether they have the experience or not, but who sees the value that they bring to the business, I guess is the best way to put it, and then can champion them and give them the resources they need to be successful.
Yeah. And so then you got the SDRs, you got product marketing, you do have marketing generalists to us who I know is doing all sorts of different task work and email cadences and things like that, SEO audits. But I guess, so now that we kind of have that background on the structure, how are you, this persona project, I think is a really good thing to dig into a bit more. So as you're trying to figure out the language that is going to resonate with the different personas, what are you doing? Like, are you interviewing the sales team? Are you listening to customer calls? Like, walk us through what you're actually doing on the ground so people can learn how they might be able to figure out this messaging for themselves.
Yeah, for sure. So we are, this is a great way because we're kind of like right in the middle of this right now. It's a combination of 3 things. One, it's listening to customer calls that are with some of like what we believe are the right titles for this persona. I think one of the really difficult things about this situation that we're in is that it's really more of a responsibility than a title, right? I think that's important. It's like the persona of that what we're exploring isn't necessarily always met with the same title at every company. And so understanding what all the range of those titles can be has been like one of the pieces of the puzzle that we're figuring out. So to do that, we're listening to customer calls with that hypothesis of titles. Well, some of them are just like the titles that are pretty obvious. And then other ones that we're still like, all right, these seem like they still might be the people that have this set of responsibilities. There are fortunately, then we're going and looking at a lot of companies that are ready to sell into that persona and understanding how they are marketing to them. Doing a lot of research on Stack Overflow and on Reddit, getting into specific channels to read and learn how people in these roles are actually talking about the problems that they're having, listening to podcasts that are built for people in that world, and following a lot of new accounts across kind of like all my social platforms as well. And then very importantly, like maybe this comes from some of the SDR background, just reaching out directly to people is another element of what we're doing now. And I think like you can't be afraid to kind of do that work on your own. I think a lot of like marketing leaders, maybe it's like too far removed from their job to go and actually hit people up on LinkedIn, or they probably don't even know how to use something like outreach maybe. I'm still plugged into those systems, right? So I can put, I'm doing a different type of outreach. These aren't necessarily sales leads, but I'm still hitting people up cold to also understand directly from them, which has been hit or miss, right? They don't know me. Do they necessarily have like reason to help me out? Because I'm straight up like, hey, can you help me understand a bit more you and what you do? And which has been hit or miss, but that's gone.
What's your messaging? So when you were reaching out to some of these potential stakeholders and personas, what's your messaging like to them?
It's along the lines of, hey, I saw if they had posted something or did something around the topic, it's really awesome what you're doing with XYZ. My company started to see some traction working with people who are doing X and Y. If you'd be open to connecting, I would love to pick your brain. If not, pretty passive, trying to like be upfront about, wanting to ask them for feedback or want to pick their brain on something. And doing so in kind of a take it or leave it way. Not as many maybe follow-ups as I might have done. And generally when I'm doing now, I mean, if I'm really not hearing back, like offering some kind of donation to a charity or something, I think a lot of people will, I mean, not a lot. Some people have been very forthcoming and being willing to help. It's a little easier when it's coming through like a warm connection. And then I think people are pretty responsive to the charity offer. I think more so than like, hey, can I send you a pair of AirPods or something, which while AirPods aren't cheap, I think that feels cheap in a way, where you can do something where like any charity of your choice is a little bit more meaningful for your time, which is really not.
Got it. So you're offering to donate to a charity of their choice for their time. And I agree, right? Like I don't love when someone's like, hey, if you take an intro call with us, we will send you AirPods or a mug or whatever. I think it's too tricky.
They have the AirPods.
It's like the incentives are wrong. Right. And the incentives are wrong from the beginning.
Well, that people can feel good about what they're doing, right? I mean, if I'm going to spend 30 minutes with you, I really care about this thing. Cool. Like, let me make a donation in your name then do that. And that's time well spent for them rather than, feeling just some like material exchange.
Yeah. Yeah. And Ray, you're asking for some advice, trying to be open about it, more passive than if you're an SDR, right? You're not putting them through like a 7-step sequence with calls and
alligator gifts at the end of it. Yeah.
Okay. That's awesome. And I think the other thing you touched on that was really fascinating and a great way to explain it is that the persona is about their responsibility, not their title.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's also like really hard when you start to like build lists, right? So I think, especially with some like more like emerging roles or roles that have emerged over the past few years, platform engineering, for example, like where that was maybe stemmed from what was like DevOps at a company before, and is now being really is like a totally different set of responsibilities. However, like not people in those roles don't always have those titles, right? And I was just reading something today actually around, X% of people who actually have this responsibility even have the title platform in their name, or the word platform in their title, right? And so I think because of that, and I think that's just an example of one, right? I think in a lot of ways, especially like maybe even more so today when like what does growth marketing mean to a lot of people too, right? I think that's my title, and that can be a series of things. Anyway, I think that, it's about trying to figure out who is actually responsible for whatever it is your product is, whatever you think your product can do to help that business, right? And tying into that business outcome that person should be impacting, less so than the titles. That gets really hard when it comes to like targeting, right? Or even if you're doing like advertising and you're on LinkedIn and you're trying to boil that down to these types of people, that can be really difficult, right? Certainly if you're building lists for like an SDR team, again, like maybe they don't know exactly how am I supposed to figure out who the right person is. And so it's experimenting a lot of the time and then trying to arm them with the right questions to ask and the right kind of research and content to say, who may be responsible for this thing, and then giving them just kind of options to try to figure that out.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Let me ask you, just going back to your team a little bit more. So,
Sure.
Right, you've got the SDRs, director of SDRs, the generalists, through us that we know, but product marketing, like help me understand their responsibility set and how that kind of coincides with what you're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Our product marketers are very hands-on. I mean, they're on calls with our sales team as well. I mean, they're not like solutions engineers in any way, but they're very much there to make sure that the way that we're positioning it and everything that we're hearing from the market live, we're putting that back into the way that we're positioning ourselves outside of those calls. So everything from the way that we position ourselves as a product, how we position the feature set that we have and tie that to business outcomes that our customers are seeing. So it's a lot of research on what our customers are doing, helping translate that into what we think a broader market will be able to use YellowBrick and apply it to their business from a data warehouse perspective. And so that's kind of like the gist of it is, making just really always creating and kind of iterating on the way that we position ourselves. And, they're doing that through updating all the content on our website, creating blog series, interviewing customers, working with our product team and our engineering team. So they're kind of, sit across the business. And they spend a lot of time speaking with people in our market to make sure that we're validating what we're doing and not just kind of like sitting in a room thinking, hey, this sounds cool, or this is a, interesting idea.
Yeah. What's keeping you up at night? What are the things that are kind of sitting in the back of your mind, or things that are biggest priority for you this year?
I don't think that we've cracked it, right? Like I think with YellowBrick, like, we still are trying to figure out the best way to position ourselves in a market that is ever evolving, because we have a series of different ways that we believe that we can position the way that our customers are getting value from us. And what keeps me up is that, like, are we communicating too much? Are we communicating enough? Are we communicating the right things? And are we creating any kind of experience that is enabling people to figure out that we are a good solution for them, right? I think I spent a lot of time maybe doing second guessing, like, is this the right way to position ourselves for this persona, target, whatever it is? And especially when there's just so many different players in this ecosystem, I think it's easy to want to try to like figure out how to compete with everybody. And I think that is actually really dangerous instead of just focusing on what we think are really our strengths. So I think finding that balance is definitely, there's been some sleepless nights of like thinking about something and way overthinking something, but you can always iterate and experiment. And I think we kind of have that mindset as a team now, that like, it doesn't need to be the last time we update something,
Yeah, I can relate. 2 nights ago, I had a very sleepless night, and there was a few things about our messaging that popped up in my head. I was like, wait a minute, is that how we're sending those emails?
Does this make sense at all?
Right. And I'm torn in that moment between rolling over and jotting a note down on my phone so I don't forget it for tomorrow, but that then like uncorking the bottle and me going on this deep rabbit hole of not being able to go back to sleep.
You'll never go back to sleep.
Trying to cut the snake off and go back to sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah. It didn't. I lost that bout the other night.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Let me ask you this. So what is the best money that you guys have spent on marketing this year?
I think it's going to be tough to do this without just a straight out plug for RGP. I think in some of the ways, like, we have experienced some of the unfortunate events of a market slowdown, and have had to make some cuts on the team that we have at YellowBrick. And because of that, we kind of forced ourselves to think about how we could be more efficient as a team. I think everyone's feeling this, right? How could we do maybe not like more with less, because I think that's pretty impossible. But I think that we're trying to figure out how do we do at least what we were doing, and maybe even what we were doing slightly better with less or more efficiently. And one of the ways that we're doing that is we just looked at we're just really clear about everything that we're trying to do, right? And when we were reshaping the team over the past the past few months, I reached out to you and I tried to figure out what we could do with utilizing a contractor. And that has saved our team a tremendous amount of time and resources in a very resource constrained environment. And that has basically allowed us to focus on some of the other things that I'm talking about right now. Because without having some of the things you just have to be doing, right? Like who's creating social posts, who's making sure those are actually getting posted, and making sure that managing our marketing automation system, and making sure that even like the pipes of like how leads are coming through and being routed out, right? Like all of that has to still, like those systems still need to stay on even when there's 3 people on your team, right? And everybody wants to be speaking with customers, and there's a looming repositioning of how we think about ourselves. So I would say some of the best money that we spend is tied to just some of the work that we've decided to outsource instead of keeping in-house, and making sure that the work that we are doing in-house is really tied to not just like tactics, but very much focused on our strategy, because we can outsource a lot of the tactics once we figure out exactly what those are going to be. And I think what we know that we need the experience, the expertise that would, I guess, like make it worth it to have someone in-house. That's the kind of work that we're trying to make sure that we do keep within our team, and is working for YellowBrick full time. So I think we've just figured out a way to balance that type of work, which is still, I think, something we're getting better at. And this is a pretty shameless plug. So I think, you can edit this as necessary to fit your audience.
Oh, we're not going to edit this at all. I didn't know that was going to be your answer, but I'm really happy that it was. I think, right, you're recognizing too that there's lots of task level work that needs to be done in any organization, no matter what size. And the sooner you can get that off your plate and onto someone else's, the sooner you can focus on potentially bigger things or more impactful things. And
that's right.
With Anne, with you guys, right? Like she's gone above and beyond some of the things that I thought she was gonna be able to do, and I know you've had some of the same feedback. But there was one thing that you had mentioned to me actually that I thought was really insightful that I didn't expect to hear from customers, where you had said that in the past, right, when you had some of this task work to delegate, you might feel guilty giving it to one of the more, like, say, senior level IC members of your team. So what ended up happening is that you do it yourself.
I would do it.
It ends up being like the worst scenario, because you're the most expensive resource, and then you're doing the lowest level work. So
yeah, for sure.
I know that's been a really good outlet for you, but how has that kind of changed your mindset on kind of the economic trade-offs of delegation?
Yeah, I think it's like just tie that back to like, is this the most important work that I could be doing today? Because I think in a lot of ways, it's like you could make that argument in so many different ways, right? Well, someone has to do it. Well, if I don't outsource, delegate this to X team member, if I do delegate this to the other team member, that they can't do these things. And so I'll just work more, right? But then am I going to be tired tomorrow? Am I not going to be in the best place to that meeting that I need to have with our COO later, right? And so I think that just came with a little bit of like maturity, maybe. Now, like I didn't necessarily need to be like, it wasn't about like the hours that I was putting in, but like the quality of the work that I was producing. And I think when you're focused on the quality of the work, then you have to like reserve what's in your gas tank for the things that when you need to hit the pedal, I guess that kind of works the metaphor, right? And so when you think about it that way, like it became at least for me, slightly easier to say, all right, I just need to make sure that these tasks are offloaded. And I think having someone who's in a contractor capacity that is specifically hired to do task-oriented type of work made that considerably easier, because I'm not constantly worried about like development and like, hey, are we going to have like a promotion for this person? Are they learning enough? I think like it's really actually hard because I'm thinking about that anyway all the time, and just like still always creating a good employee experience. I think that's critical no matter what, regardless of the level of the person, if they're in your organization as a full-time or contractor. But having that relationship has made it really easier to have really clear communication about this is exactly what needs to get done and what that timeline is. And maybe I'll learn from that for their full-time employees as well. Because I wonder if like that's actually necessary. You know, that it was like that's a distinction between people that are contractors or full-time. Yeah. And maybe I gotta think about that more.
Yeah, it's a constant battle, right? And you have to ruthlessly prioritize.
Yeah.
And there's never like there's never like a totally correct answer. You try to do your best, but I think my kind of rule of thumb is, hey, if I've been able to do this thing multiple times myself, then I should be able to figure out how to delegate to someone else, assuming it doesn't require like my particular expertise. And I can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's an element of that like lead from the front mentality too, right? Like I'm going to ask someone to do a series of things, like I should be willing to do that as well. And I think that that's like very, very valid, right? I think like there's elements of that should be acknowledged and recognized. Like, and there's always times when like you just have to get something done, period. And I'm not going to necessarily wait around for someone else to do something, certainly. So I think it's just a balance. That's like.
Yeah, I think you're right. Let me ask you this. So I think we'll talk a bit more here about internal marketing, because I know that's something that you've had a lot of experience with in kind of communication, game planning, and things like that.
Yeah.
But as like the pre-segue to that, I'm curious, when you are particularly like you guys have to get ready for a board meeting, right? Or some big executive meeting. What's your typical process from the marketing standpoint? What are you going through? What are you gathering? How are you presenting it?
Yeah, I'm not presenting to the board in my current role at YellowBrick, but I can talk about preparing for executive meetings at my last role. And I think one of the things that I try to always do, especially if I'm going to be presenting something that I know is where like I'm the head of whatever this is. If it's a project or a new initiative, or I'm trying to get a decision in this meeting, is to be one. I generally will go do my best to communicate with everybody beforehand so that no one in that meeting is taken off guard by what I'm about to present. And that takes time. It also means preparing well ahead of time. It means scheduling a lot of meetings to make sure that you have time for one-on-one feedback from people before you get them in a room. This was something that I think, I learned from Mark years ago. In terms of like, if you really want to get something done in these group settings, making sure that you're prepared. I mean, and in those conversations, I'm always upfront with people, like, you don't need to agree with something I'm, putting out there right now. And let's have this conversation as a group so that there is that ability for all of us to kind of disagree or understand, or poke holes in something publicly, because I think that's really important instead of just in these one-on-one conversations. Then it's like, cool, like we already settled that before the meeting. That's not the purpose. But it does help people prepare their thoughts, prepare their questions so that they don't feel like, well, I didn't really have this is really important. I didn't have time to think about this. And I think with a healthy executive leadership meeting, either that's done by like preparing notes or preparing a presentation and sending that ahead of time if you don't have time to meet with everybody one-on-one. And depending on kind of like what it is and the weight of what that holds, I think you got to figure out how necessary to do that. But I think that is really critical in terms of gathering feedback ahead of time and then creating a space for people to feel comfortable having a conversation about what might be a really difficult topic, right? Because I think it takes time for different people with different personalities or different backgrounds to process information, right? And we, as a team, especially at Pliancy, tried to create an environment where we were very honest, and we tried to make sure that we were getting everybody's opinions to get to the best outcome. And sometimes those are really passionate conversations. And with my personality, I know that I can overtake conversations a lot. And so I think that was another piece of like in these leadership meetings, making sure that not letting my passion, again, I guess, for something silence other people that may still be processing something, and making sure that there's space for people to be able to share their opinions and their perspectives, or else we just were not going to get to the best outcome. So I think that answered your question, or maybe I went a little tangent.
I think no, definitely. I think the intention that you go about internal communication is really important. I mean, you in particular, I think you do a really good job with that, and I think there is a really big importance of trying to give people a heads up. I think you basically have two sides of the spectrum often with this. You have someone that wants to like totally follow the rules and like separation of church and state and only communicate things like at the moment in time. And then you have other people that play by no rules and they're like pretty loose with it, and they'll just tell anyone anything whenever they speak with them. And I think, right, like when in doubt,
you got to have a balance.
Probably. Yeah, you do need to have that balance. And it's like, treat people like humans. You actually told me this, and it was about prospecting, but I think it applies to basically everything in life, and particularly in business, is just be relentlessly human, because that's going to throughout everything that you do.
Right. I think that is like, especially when you're having difficult conversations, or, if you're coming out of like a layoff or something, right? And you're now communicating with the rest of the team that is there. That's a really hard one, right? Because there's certain things you're simply not going to say, or your lawyers tell you like you really should not say these things, and you're trying to balance being human while also your responsibility as a leader at that company to not say the wrong thing, or put give too much information about someone personally, right? And so I think that balancing act of like how and when to communicate and what to communicate is like really, really hard. And I think internal communications is the hardest thing about leadership, and certainly about implementing strategy. You can have a great strategy, and I think that will get you that. So like you'll probably win a lot, but being able to communicate that strategy really effectively, and having a culture and implementing a culture of how you communicate those things through your company, I think is critical. And I learned that really, over the course of my career, but very much at Pliancy. I mean, that was, I had the ability to work with someone, Clay Hernandez, who was our director of communications there. And she is just an absolute master when it comes to, all things brand, but also employee communications as well. And learning from her and understanding her perspective on how to do that in a really strategic way definitely changed my career. And just I don't think I recognized the importance of that and thought that, all right, well, as long as we have really good go-to-market and really good tactics, like we can win, right? We'll grow. But it's your internal team and how you communicate with them. If everyone's not on board, then you're not going to be successful.
Yeah, our words matter, right? What we say carries weight.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that I've always found helpful when I know that I'm going to have a difficult conversation with someone on my team, whether it's termination, a performance issue, whatever it is to actually role play that beforehand with someone on the
for sure.
Because no matter what, you're probably going to get a little nervous during that moment, but what you don't know until you do it, until you don't understand the tonality and the nuance that you have to have there until you actually say it out loud. So even if you're reading a script, that's cool to have, but actually forcing yourself to say the words out loud to someone else helps immensely.
I role play everything. I mean, I think that comes from the sales background, but I mean, Marcus, who was the CEO of Pliancy, him and I would spend hours and hours preparing for all hands or any kind of internal presentation that we were doing, or even, a lot of the time it was also sales conversations or customer conversations, or if he was going on a podcast. I mean, we were obsessive maybe about the way that we were communicating there. And I think that was incredibly intentional, honestly. And so we role played a ton. It's a huge part of how we also work with our sales team, which I think is obvious. But I think there's so many applications for role playing that that most companies or most leaders don't take advantage of.
Yeah. Let's move on to a couple other things here. Is there just like a pure tactic standpoint? What's the favorite tool that you're using right now on the marketing or sales side?
Favorite tool? I don't know if I have a favorite tool that we're using right now. Like Ghost Stack is like pretty straightforward right now because we frankly have like slimmed down a lot of what we were using. I mean, we have a pretty awesome RevOps machine in terms of how it's all the classic tools that people are using, right? Zoom Info and Apollo. And then, we're putting that through outreach and into Orem. And so we're doing things that I don't think are like incredibly innovative from a tech stack perspective. I think the most important thing that we're doing comes in how we're using tools within there, like really to segment the lists and to segment the way that we're organizing our call list for our SDRs, which is really specific down to the role level. And then that gives us reporting on the back end down to what list we were calling, when we were calling them. And when we're really able to like fine tune our machine, understand exactly how many leads they're hitting up on any given week or month. So I'd say it's less about like a specific tool, but some of the way that we've orchestrated those tools over the past, year or so, is I'm really proud of, and our RevOps team is really fantastic as well.
On that ring lead piece for a second, any key insights or like meaningful changes you guys made once you started to get some of that data out there based on the segmentation?
Yeah, I mean, we've changed. We've stopped going after certain segments. We've honed in on who our ICP is. We understand how different personas convert further down funnel. We know that if we don't have a certain persona after X amount of calls now, whether that's a discovery call or after a demo, that we know and can be more clear with our sales team about what we think we need to do to move opportunities down funnel along as well. So I think it's not just about the insights we get from top of funnel of like what's converting from a cold call to a to someone wanting to learn more, take a discovery call, but then what is actually happening down funnel when we are able to categorize everybody in our CRM by these segments. And also like one messaging got them to that point as well. And so I think we're kind of using that in a series of different ways.
Yeah. I don't have a tech stack nearly that big, but I know a lot of people do. And I think hearing stuff like that and how you might be using certain tools, particularly Ringlead in this case for the segmentation, right, to figure out where people should be spending their time and ultimately improve close rates is really cool. Let me ask you a little bit more about your professional circle, right?
Sure.
You and I have known each other for a long time, but you've been in the startup world and built a pretty good network yourself. Who are, particularly now that you probably joined the leadership and executive ranks in your last couple of roles, who are the people that are closest to you in your professional circle?
It's a really good question. Professional circle. I think it's interesting because some of these people have become really good friends of mine as well. I think that you're one of the people for sure. We spend a lot of time together, right? That's that outcome maybe of just working together closely through RGP, but even before that in previous roles as well, right? And I think that there's people that I always go to for advice from a professional perspective. One of them is a longtime mentor of mine, Sasaka Adapado, who runs a company called Launch Source, and him and I have been friends for probably close to 10 years, and he's someone who I always am going to for either any kind of advice, but he's also become, again, a really good friend of mine. Jordan Wan, a closer IPU, is another person that I'm, if there's something that I'm weighing, it's a decision usually leaning into like the career side of things. He's absolutely someone who I go to. Amy Holtzman, who is the CMO at Check, and her and I worked together at Splash, where she was the VP of marketing, and I was on the running the demand the BDR team over there, as well as some of the previous CEOs and companies I worked for as well. I mean, Marcus Olson, who's the CEO of Pliancy, is someone who him and I got incredibly close in a short period of time, and Patricio Pace over there as well. And so, Sachin Kamdar from Parsley, him and I, chat less these days, but is always someone who I think about when I'm making some kind of career decision, as well as even John Levitt as well, who I think is still at Parsley today. So it's probably like a commonality of people that were either my direct bosses or I worked extremely close with, that I built, that I just had a ton of respect for and kind of like looked up to, and then try to be intentional about staying in touch with them. And maybe it's like my need to constantly talk things out, which is definitely a character trait of mine that like leads me to call people to think through something. It's probably the extrovert part of it as well. Like I think better when I'm speaking about something. But yeah, those are a bunch of names. And I'm sure I'm forgetting people. I hope I didn't forget anybody too obvious.
Don't worry, it's not like a big speech, but I think what's kind of cool to hear about that is there's a variety of different backgrounds of the folks that you're close with, but
yeah,
I think what you've probably done a pretty exceptional job of, or maybe some happenstance, is you kind of always had really good bosses and managers. And I think that, right, as people are kind of in their career, the manager can make the role so much different. And I think you've been in a good spot where you've had some really good managers throughout your career.
Yeah. And I want to say that like I've been lucky, but I think like I don't know if it's luck, right? Like I think it's intentional about choosing positions that you think you're going to be good based on that, right? I think like that's probably some really early advice, was like choose the manager, not necessarily the company. And I think, I'm working now again. I mean, Mark and I are counterparts. I think the interesting thing is like, because Mark and I are counterparts, but he was my boss for a long time. It's like, we have like, our COO is constantly like, he wants to hear my opinion, but I'm like, we should really talk to Mark, right? Like we should go and get his input on this, what I think is critical. And we work extremely well as in this kind of role that we're in together now. But it's like, he'll always be my boss, right? I mean, I'll always kind of look up to him in that way. But yeah, I have been fortunate enough to have some really amazing bosses and or managers, and that I think is critical.
Yeah. And I think it is, some of it's luck, but also, right, like you now have that sensitivity ingrained into you of really caring about who that manager is going to be. And I think that's really good advice for anyone that's on the job hunt right now. All right, last question I like to ask people is, what is one lesson or piece of advice that you think about almost every day?
So I think something that was really an interesting, maybe turning point from a career perspective. The first time working directly for a CEO was at Pliancy. And with that came probably the most ambiguous job that I was doing, right? It was the good job with strategy and growth. That is probably the most ambiguous type that you could possibly have. And I was really working incredibly closely with the CEO on a daily basis. I had direct responsibilities. Our sales team rolled up to me, the communications team rolled up to me. And then we had a project management team that also rolled in, and that was kind of the strategy piece. But there was so much ambiguous directive, right? And I was working with an executive coach at the time, and I was at this point where I was very, very frustrated by the lack of clarity on what my role was and what I was supposed to be doing. And the way that she helped me work through this was getting comfortable with that ambiguity and making that clarity for myself. And I think that was the first time where I wasn't being given such crystal clear, either I had a number, and as long as I was hitting that number, I had a lot of ability to figure out how to get there, right? But I still had this thing that I was driving towards, and I knew that if I did this, then I was doing well, right? And this was the first time in my career that I didn't have this like crystal clear objective. And I think that was incredibly difficult, but she really helped me figure out that you're not going to get that. And as you rise in these companies and as you get into the leadership role, like it's going to become more ambiguous, and being comfortable with that ambiguity is the only way you're going to stay at that level and the only way you're going to be able to perform at that level. And so instead of presenting that as a problem, I would start to think about it as an opportunity. And it changed the way I communicated, especially with with the CEO and with our executive team. Instead of, you can't just bring problems to the table, right? You have to bring solutions, and creating that solution is critical. At least it doesn't have to be right, and you might not have all the ideas, and it might be a combination of things that you're piecing together based on a series of conversations that you're having with your peers or people, or people that work for you or people that report to. But you've got to at least try to be creating solutions all the time, or else like leave that company, right? I mean, and that was where it came to. It was like, if this is not gonna work out, then like stop. There's no one else who's gonna change this for you at this point, right? Like you have to basically accept either the position that you're in and then make the most of it and try to improve it, or leave. That is not why I left Pliancy, by the way. Like I loved, that was probably the best part of my career. I mean, love YellowBrick and all the companies I've worked with, but Pliancy was just an unbelievable team, and love that organization and everybody that I worked with there. This was, that did not tie to that directly, but I think that's important. You have to make that decision to stay and then be part of the solution.
Yeah, it's funny. This is actually something I think about all the time, and I used to tell other people a lot, is if you are just bringing up problems without suggesting a solution, you're just complaining. And
you're going to become toxic, right? And like, be frustrated with things, right? Like that's fine. Like there's always a time and place for that. But figure it out. And especially when you get into a leadership role, like, well, you can't really be talking shit with your team and with your employees at that point, because the buck stops with you. So I think that's just a level of maturity too that's really necessary as you rise into through these organizations that I learned. I mean, I was first time in that level at that company at Pliancy, and fortunately they supported me with an executive coach who really helped me progress through that period. Yeah.
Let me ask you real quick on the executive coach thing. What was the biggest impact that coach made on your career?
I think that I became a better communicator. I think that I learned how to communicate more concisely, and the importance of communicating more around the why we were doing things as a leader, and leaving room for creativity in terms of how we will do something, or even what we will do to accomplish that. She took an approach where she interviewed everyone that I worked with very closely, and was able to extract some of my weaknesses that I don't think I would have found on my own, or maybe I knew were there, but like didn't think were like huge problems. I think one of those was around recognizing that, okay, maybe I do sound very confident when I'm speaking about things, and that could actually be silencing other people that maybe are not as passionate about something or aren't as willing to speak up in a group setting. And that helped me realize that, okay, I'm hurting in the company if I'm doing that in a way that is not allowing space for other people's perspectives to be brought into a conversation. And so I think that looking at the way I was communicating from a different lens and being more thoughtful about my communication, and understanding the importance of some of the words that I was choosing, I think she helped me in all those areas.
That's awesome. I think that maybe even myself, like, never quite know what an executive coach is, what they're doing, what they're there for. As I've thought about getting some one-on-one coaching myself, I still haven't pulled that trigger yet. But
it's like professional therapy.
Right, exactly.
And in some ways, I mean, it was a little more depending on your therapist, a little more hands-on. But
yeah. It's good. It's good to have someone outside of your manager and your significant other to talk to this stuff about. So
Yeah. And the interesting thing about that was that she was working with a few of us. And so, she had a good perspective of what we were doing and a lot of the problems that we were having. And she was able to kind of work with us in a way that she actually understood in a lot of ways. She knew us pretty well through that. And I'm not sure that I would like recommend that or not, right? I think like that was an approach that we took. I mean, it was useful for us, but some people might be like, that's crazy that more than, that multiple people of the same leadership team had the same person. I mean, it was effective. I'm not sure if that's best practice.
yeah, awesome. Well, I think that wraps us for the most part. Tell real quick, what should people know about YellowBrick and where can they find you and or the company?
Yeah, you can find us at yellowbrick.com. YellowBrick is a data warehouse that goes across on-premises solutions, cloud solutions, hybrid solutions, and we really can help customers regardless of where they are in their entire data lifecycle or customer company lifecycle. So we've got a really unique position where we've got products and a work, and that can really appeal to a lot of different types of customers. And so you can check us out. And I am on LinkedIn a lot, so that's a good place to find me. Yeah, I'd say that's probably the best way to get in touch.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your stories and some of your advice today. It was super helpful, and I think people will get a lot of value.
Awesome. Well, good to see you, Jason.
See ya.